Hello and welcome to HealthTech Hour on UK Health Radio. My name is Steve Roest, and each week we bring you the best news, views and interviews with the leaders, founders and clinicians who are driving the health tech revolution in the UK and beyond. I'm a CEO and founder of a health tech company myself, and I'm passionate about the people and companies who are changing the world. Before I introduce today's guest, as always, I'd like to remind everyone listening, if you can please follow us on the socials, it's at HealthTech Hour. And then please also follow the station, which is at UK Health Radio, just to stay on top of all of the great content that's coming up. So today's guest, David Crane, designed and developed the most popular stop smoking app on the market today called Smoke Free, with over 5 million downloads. David had an epiphany while studying for his master's in psychology and decided to focus on behavior change, specifically digital behavior change, which led to a total career change and led to him launching the app. David has written extensively about self-control, self-regulation, and behavior change. He's a leading proponent of using digital technologies to help people develop their self-control. And it's a pleasure to have him on the show. So, David, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm very good. Thanks, Steve. Thanks for having me here.
Good. How is lockdown been for you and for the team? I kind of ask everyone, what's the kind of mood in the camp been like?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've always, before lockdown, we were working remotely quite a lot of the time anyway. So from a change of work practices, we haven't had much to adjust to. I think developers quite like a lot of solitude and being left to things without annoying people like me, bugging them with questions all the time. And so they've sort of flourished. Some of the other team, it has allowed us to we've recruited quite a few people for the advisors, the stop smoking advice that we provide, and it means that we can recruit from all over the country, of course. Mm-hmm. And then the other big thing is that there's just been this big move towards technology for healthcare, and face-to-face stop smoking services were obviously put on hold, and we were able to start providing a few more services to local authorities who might otherwise have been a bit more cautious about taking on something new. They were kind of forced into change, and so for those reasons, it's been a really interesting year of growth for us.
Cool, good. Well, look, I know you've already got over 5 million people downloaded the app, so we can dig into that in a little bit more. But as we kind of went through before the show's in 3 parts. The first is like an origins, how you got to be doing what you're doing, and the second bit is what you're doing right now that's changing the world. And then the third bit, where I know you have a lot of opinions, is what's sort of coming next. And I think that there's definitely some things in there that we can touch on around the use of digital technologies to change behavior, whether or not healthcare systems should be investing more in digital therapeutics, so digital therapy, digital treatment. And then we can kind of talk around any other issues of the day, trying to stay away from our friend COVID, but it's a little bit difficult. It's a bit of a white elephant. So first of all, where did you start in your career? What was your kind of your start in the world of work?
I mean, work-wise, I was doing all kinds of different things. I was in the Merchant Navy for 4 years, straight from school. Okay. I mean, I left school with 1 O-level because I used to get in a fair bit of trouble at the time, and never really, education at the time wasn't something that I kind of got on with. So I spent a few years in the Merchant Navy, but always had this love of technology. So even I'm like 57 now, and so this was 82, early days of computers. You had to press play on a tape machine to get to the part of the program that you wanted to run. But I just loved it. Something about computers I loved. I used to skip off school and go and play Space Invaders in the local arcade, and I just had always that love of technology, and that kind of, from a career perspective, kind of led through to in about 1995 founding a web development agency. Okay. So one of the first in the UK at that time, and then various different years in sort of starting up different tech-based companies, the debating website, a comparisons websites, or other various different ideas before I kind of ended up with the app.
And at what point, what kind of behaviors did you sort of maintained throughout all of those different changes? Was there anything that's like consistent around, some behaviors that you maintained or that you stuck to that kind of were the kind of consistent narrative all the way through those different sort of iterations of work?
I've always been interested in self-development. So I've always, way back and in primary school, I do sort of believe that this is when it started, because I was bullied for quite a long time in primary school, and my response to being bullied was to think, okay, well, what can I do differently to stop this? How do I prevent this from happening? How do I, and look to myself to make those kinds of changes, and I guess that kind of, I found things that worked. I found things that made my life better, and that just kick-started this belief that, oh, well, I can improve my life if I look to make some adjustments. And so I kind of think that all the way through, and I believe there's a lot of crossover between sort of web stuff and behavior change, because within normal web stuff, you're trying to get people to do something, right? Even if it's just a brochureware site, you're trying to get them to call the company at the end of it. So you want the user to feel a certain way. You want them to have a certain experience with the website, and then you want them to end up doing something, let alone, the commerce website, when you're trying to take people all the way through. So I think understanding that, that this is what technology needs to do in order to meet its purpose, and it needs to change behavior. And this is some of the ways in which we can go about changing behavior. And accompany that with a kind of a lifelong grumpy old man approach towards tech, where I'm constantly irritated by things that don't work in the way that I would expect them to or hope them to.
Right.
And so just always try to create things that basically didn't annoy me.
Okay.
So hopefully, they still do annoy me, if I'm honest with you. There's still things I'd like to change, but yeah, that's been a driving force. Yeah.
Okay. And where did the psychology piece come into it? Because I know that you have a PhD in psychology, and you were at the Digital Behaviour Lab in London for part of that. So how does that get woven into the story? So
I think the informal self-development stuff would then lead to one-to-one therapy and group therapy and 4-day retreats and fasts and all this other stuff. I wanted to formalize that. It felt like, because I've been interested in this kind of behavior change for a long time, but I sort of felt like I needed a bit more experience under my belt. I felt like a number of ways in which I felt differently over the course of my life made me realize that, there's probably no point that you get to and you think, oh yeah, I've got everything sorted now. It's just the constant iteration. But I felt like I needed, if I was going to recommend things to other people, I should probably have a bit more life experience under my belt. So I kind of forgot psychology, went on, did all the tech stuff. And then around the London Olympics, when I was just thinking in 2012, I was thinking, I wanted a career change. And I got inspired by the sports psychologists at the London Olympics. And I kind of imagined, I should say, the role that they would be having on the individual athletes, because you could imagine the pressure that they're under. Right? They know how to to run around a track or to get over a high jump or do these other things. But suddenly, when the eyes of the world are on top of you, and how does that affect your performance? I think that's
the expectations.
And as a long-suffering Arsenal fan,
I
was very aware of a team that needed some psychological help at the time. I think probably still does.
Have you volunteered yourself to help? Have you been down there?
No, I haven't, because I sort of feel I didn't end up doing sports psychology, and they do need some specialists. I kind of thought I wanted to be a sports psychologist, and then ended up trying to do a master's in sports psychology, but they wouldn't let me in because I didn't have any base in psychology. So I said, "Oh, listen, you have to go and do a conversion course." And I was like, "This is 48 years old." So I was pretty annoyed at having to spend another year of my life and £6,000 doing a master's that would only lead me to kind of get into the end point. But I thought, all right, I'll do it. I've got a vision. But luckily, this is just one of the luckiest breaks of my life, really, because I'd just given up smoking when we started thinking about thesis subjects. And the idea came to me to create a no smoking app, because when I was trying to give up smoking, I couldn't see any that I thought adopted the approach to change that I had found helpful in all the different change that I'd done.
Okay. And what was that approach?
Well, one of the big things I think is about seeing a sense of progress.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're making change that requires continual effort, which almost all long-term change does, smoking, exercise, diet, we can start these things optimistic about the outcomes and believing that these wonderful things are going to happen to us, but we've got to keep making effort to deny ourselves the things that used to bring us pleasure, the rewards that used to give us, the ways that we used to manage our life. So we need to kind of constantly resist temptation to the old behavior and then move towards the new behavior. And that process, I think, is made easier if you can feel like you're making progress. If you can feel that today is better than yesterday.
And is that the same as positive reinforcement? Is that the same thing?
It's an element of positive reinforcement. Yeah, it's part of a control theory of behavior, which argues that behavior is goal driven, and that we use self-monitoring to work out where we are in relation to a goal, feedback to work out whether we're moving closer or further away from the goal, and then we put action plans in place to kind of shorten the distance between where we are and the goal. So progress is really feedback. Progress is a feedback mechanism that says, this is how well you have done so far. And within the app, we show progress time smoke free, and the progress, the money saved, and the cigarettes not smoked. And we show how health is improving, and we show how we give badges for time progress. And we try to kind of constantly reinforce this sense that the effort is worth continuing to make. And that's one of the things that we get a lot in the feedback that people leave, is they talk about the progress. They talk about how important that is as a concept, or at the individual parts of it, the time or the money or whatever.
Okay. And what was the motivation for you to do the smoking app as part of your thesis? Was it literally just a moment of sort of clarity where you said, oh, well, I just gave up smoking and that was quite hard? And I mean, was it that simple, or was there anything else to it?
No, there was a couple of other things. So one of the theories of behaviour that I studied at University College London, which is the combi model, which is that behaviour is the B in behaviour in the combi model is affected by capability, opportunity, and motivation. And so I had the capability to create this app because I sort of developed the tech skills and the understanding of behaviour change. But the opportunity part came because I was lucky enough to have a very good friend of mine who had an app development company. So he had developers and they weren't fully employed at the time. So he said, yeah, listen, I'll just, I'll ask my devs to do a bit of the work. So it's kind of this, it's this just very fortuitous combination of events that led to the opportunity to build the app and get it out there. Because it originally started as just a pure research project. It wasn't meant to be a business. It was, it was, can we test whether this stop smoking plan that I'd created was more effective than just the basic features of the app? So the basic features of the app, what the other stop smoking apps provide. And I was saying, here, I've got this idea for a stop smoking plan based on my theories of behavior change. Let's test that and see whether it's effective. And so that was my master's project.
So you built a kind of a very basic, almost copy of the existing apps that were out there, but then there was a different option within your app that was your plan. Is that right?
Yeah, although we don't like to use the word copy, Steve. I think it's inspiration is the...
inspired by?
Yeah, inspired by. No, I mean, look, when you're...
None of that stuff Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was going to say, any reasonable, entrepreneur will look to see what people want from the existing apps that are out there. They'll look to see, okay, what are the features that people are using? It's obviously what we did, but then I think the thing that's key and the thing that makes the difference is we said, people are showing time smoke free. They're showing that, but it's not obvious. It's kind of one of the things that they show. And what we did was say, okay, well, we're putting it front and center. We think this is the most important thing, more than anything else. We think that what people want when they open the app is to see that figure, time smoke free, and to see that figure's gone up, and to have a sense of, if I go back to smoking, I lose that. progress.
Yeah, so it's sort of like, yeah, you can log in and it's always going to be more than the last time you logged in.
Yes.
Sort of, right. So
exactly.
that's always a positive thing, in effect.
Exactly, and it creates that sense of reward, which then obviously encourages repeat behaviour.
So what was at the time when you came up with the app, what was the general market like for quitting smoking? Not just apps, but generally what was out there? What was the kind of competition, for want of a better word?
So there are two things that you need when stopping smoking, or there are two things that make quitting easier. One is medication, such as nicotine replacement therapy, Champix, and increasingly e-cigarettes. So these are the kind of replacement. These help you manage cravings, decrease withdrawal symptoms, and those kind of pretty well established. Obviously, vapes are an emerging thing, but that kind of area of the market was pretty well established. And we know NRT works, we know Champix works, and we've got pretty good evidence that vapes work. The other side.
When you say work, you mean help people to quit? Is that what you mean by
yes,
work? Okay.
That's what I mean. Yes, I mean help people to quit.
Okay.
And then the other aspect is behavioural support. So, fundamentally, what we're trying to get people to do is to change habits. We're trying to extinguish reward patterns that have been trod deeply over decades often. And get people to form new kind of reward mechanisms and replacement activities. This is a skill. We're not born with this skill. Every single person in the world has to learn this skill because it actually goes against what our core evolutionary behavior, which is to grab this stuff. So behavioral support teaches these habit changing skills. Fundamentally, it helps people get through their quit. It does a whole load of things, but behavioral support, until very recently, has only been delivered face-to-face or sometimes over the telephone.
So, like, I've never smoked, but never been addicted to smoking. I am probably, I'd confess that I've got a bit of a coffee problem. I decided yesterday, I go through a period where I'll drink an ever increasing amount of coffee to the point where I need to quit. And then, so I did that yesterday morning. So I'm still suffering kind of like the withdrawal symptoms of that. But in terms of when you say face-to-face, do you actually mean there's a pathway where someone would sit down with an advisor and talk to them about their progress with smoking and how it's going and their feelings about it? And what is that was what was happening, happening?
Yeah, it's a program. So it's a 5-week program, sometimes 3 months, really tried and tested. Very, very effective.
Okay.
Smoker goes to a clinic, has a setup session, gets a plan tailored for them, gets advised medications, talks about difficult situations coming up and how they might handle them, and a few other things, and then comes in and checks in weekly for the next 4 weeks. And gets quit rates 40 to 45% at the 1 month point. It's one of the most effective things that you can do when you're stopping smoking. And so, but it's very underutilized, partly because you have to be fairly motivated to want to go to a stop smoking clinic on a weekly basis for 5 weeks.
Is it during like work time and things like that as well?
They have some out of hours, but it's difficult for shift workers. It's difficult for people who've got kids.
Yeah.
It's obviously been. So I think that. There's a number of different factors that make that underutilized. The second factor is that actually people don't reach out for support as often as we should. And as often, that we have this sense that, it's better to do it on our own. It's kind of somehow more, the achievement is somehow lessened if we get support, which doesn't make any sense. The top athletes in the world have world-class coaches on them all day, every day. So,
yeah.
But anyway, that's one of the reasons why behavioural support is underutilized. But convenience is a big factor, and anonymity is another one. There is it's embarrassing, or you don't really want to go back and admit to someone face to face, or it's hard to go back to admit to someone face to face that you either you smoked or you're struggling. Even a lot of people just have difficulty admitting they're struggling. Yeah. If you're pregnant, you're pregnant and you go, you really don't want to go back and admit that you're smoking at that point. So the sense of anonymity that a digital product can provide
Yeah.
can solve those convenience and that anonymity issue.
And is there, look, I'm not an expert in this area whatsoever, but I also use an app to track alcoholic drinks. So just logging things, doesn't do anything more than that. It was more out of a desire to try and understand how much I was drinking and how that related to the recommended guidelines, and just on a drink basis. And I think that there's definitely an aspect where if you are in a situation where you can't admit to having done something because of a stigma or a shame, then there's a risk of you just walking away from the entire effort, because you sort of, if like, I can see why, so even if I have a target every week of 7 drinks, for example, but I have 8, if I feel embarrassed about logging the 8, then I might as well not be doing it in the first place. So I can imagine if I had to go and speak to people every week about it and explain, maybe a bit like when you go to the GP and they ask you how much you drink and you always go low, for example, a bit like that. I can see that might be the case.
Yeah, exactly. Which alcohol app are you using, by the way?
I will tell you, it's called, I've got it right here. There were quite a few, so I just kind of grabbed one. Less. It's called Less.
Just Less, not Drink Less.
No, it's just called Less.
Okay.
But it's, it was a, first time in a long time that I actually started to really log the drinks, and for me, I find it, the log, I know that you've written pretty extensively about logging as a feature of Smoke Free, logging cravings and things like that. And so I'm kind of interested in how that works from a behavioral perspective.
Yeah, I think, well, so is it, because the reason I was asking, because I built an alcohol reduction app for my PhD that was called Drink Less.
Oh, sorry. I can use that one if you prefer.
It's a much better app. You really should.
Other apps are available.
One of the things that's fascinating about alcohol studies is the effect of self-monitoring itself. So when you're doing an alcohol study, you'll do screening at baseline to determine the level of drinking that someone has and whether they're the kind of drinker that you're looking for. And they ask this series of 10 questions, the alcohol unit disorders identification test, the audit test. And what numerous studies have found is that simply asking those 10 questions, the screening questions, causes people to reflect on their drinking enough that they then lower their drinking after that, even if they're just in the control group. So it's really hard it makes alcohol studies quite hard to measure, but it also shows this effect of self-monitoring, because I think quite naturally we respond to the things that we're monitoring. We're thinking, oh, I've got a target of 8 drinks a week. You sort of know where you are to that. So it kind of helps you, just the monitoring itself helps you change behavior. The critical thing is, as you said, is that how do you deal with unsuccessful goal attempts? And we should be very careful. We shouldn't call these failures, right? They are attempts in which you don't hit your goal. And so the sort of goal setting literature is fairly clear about this, that goals should be achievable, but fairly difficult. So they kind of just want to be a little bit out of reach. And the way that we handle that in Drink Less is that if the goal was within a margin of error, say 10%, say you're going for 10 drinks a week was your target and you actually had 11, we'd kind of ignore that. If you had 12 drinks a week for 2 weeks in a row, we'd say, oh, maybe, is this the right goal for you? Has that been a difficult period? Have you been to a few different weddings? Is there something that could account for that difference? Or do you want to readjust your goal? So here, the aim there is to sort of make people think, we'll help them set an achievable goal without shaming or trying to lower the self-efficacy, which is, of course, critical if we're to make any kind of behavior change attempt. The last thing you want is to make people feel, I can't do this.
Yeah, because then they just switch off and they won't use it again, and then they'll kind of ignore it.
Yeah, and they'll ignore the problem, right? They won't change their behavior.
Yeah. Because they've had a bad experience with attempting to change their behavior, not just a failure, but a sense of shame that's associated with that failure.
And we would rather protect ourselves from that sort of the psychological distress that comes along with feeling that we have failed or feeling shame than addressing the far off potential liver damage or other types of harm that could come from the behavior. Because this is when we're talking about health behavior change, the problems that we're facing are 10, 20 years in the future. They're invisible.
Yeah. To us today, basically.
Yeah. So you have to it's a tricky thing to do as as we've found over the years, because the maintenance of behavior is where the problem lies in behavior change. We're pretty good about getting people to start a new behavior, but keeping them going is where we need to do the learning, and quick.
So I agree with you. So how did you? So I know that we sort of got in touch via the NHS Accelerator program, which I know that you were on a few years ago. So how did you transition from, app built sort of out of a master's project, kind of with some of your mates developers, and thank you very much, that's all very helpful, into, something that's embedded in the NHS that's got over 5 million downloads? Like, what was that sort of process like for you? Because that's quite a large leap from one to the other.
It was very gradual. So we carried on. It was clear that we had something that people liked from the off. My aim for the study was 500 participants. I told my supervisor, he laughed at me. He said, that was a ridiculous number. What are you thinking?
Okay.
50 maybe. We ended up with 26,000.
Wow, just because you put it up on the App Store and it got downloaded, or how?
Yeah, we got downloads. Wow. We knew how to. We were good at getting the app found.
Okay.
We created an app that people really liked using. And we didn't.
Was it free, presumably, as well at the time?
Completely free.
Yeah.
No ads or anything like that. So developed a good reputation in the marketplace, and then that led to a link with Professor Robert West at UCL, who's world renowned in this field, and there was a PhD going. So I continued my education. I knew from that point that what we had was the opportunity to do some really interesting research here, because we had enough users that fundamentally what we could do is start to try different behavior change techniques and see what works in this medium.
Because it's in the smoke-free app.
In the smoke-free app. So we can run a lot of randomized controlled trials or A/B tests. We can do a lot of experimentation to find out not just what behavior change techniques work, but what combination and what dose and for whom and at what time. These are the sorts of questions that we need to answer. And I'm not in any way well, I probably am a bit delusional, but I'm not fooling myself that answering those questions to detail is not something I'm going to achieve in my lifetime. Right. But we need to that's where we need to get to. We need to sort of work out what kind of this person who wants to stop drinking or stop smoking or eat better, they're this kind of person, they're at this stage in their process. What sort of things do we need to do for them right now? This is where
is that because you believe some of the, again, how would you describe it? Some of the techniques or the techniques or sort of design, or however you describe that could be applied to people, different issues that all relate to self-control or self-regulation, whether it's smoking or eating or exercise. You think there might be some commonalities between those?
Yes, I do. So I think that a lot of what we're talking about here is self-regulation of one kind, self-control. It's about laying gratification, resisting temptation, putting yourself first. There are some things that cross over between when you look at abstinence-based behaviors, like smoking, which is, you move into abstinence, alcohol addiction, you move into abstinence. With other types of behaviors, with some alcohol and with food, you look into moderation. So there are techniques that don't translate. But it's actually more thinking about personality types, ages, cultural differences. Right. So one of the work that's emerging, again, largely out of UCL, is this atomizing behavior change into different techniques. So thinking, what are the component parts of a behaviour change theory? What are the component parts of a behaviour change intervention? And how then do we kind of try to measure the effect of those parts individually in combination? So for example, feedback and self-monitoring, or control. So my PhD was on control theory, really. And so we looked at the combination of feedback, self-monitoring, action planning, and goal setting within an intervention. But what if you were to say, okay, well, some people need different amounts of feedback or different types of feedback. For example, some people might want really positive, supportive, kind of, cheery, bright, and some people may want a bit more of a dour, sergeant major, pull your act together. What are you doing? Some people may respond better to that. And some people may respond well to that kind of feedback at one point, and the same person to the different kind of feedback at another point. It's basically what we're talking about here fundamentally is if you had an expert stop smoking advisor or alcohol counselor or someone in front of you who was able to respond to you in that moment and had at their resource and a range of different techniques, what would they say?
Right.
That's what we're trying to get to with digital.
Trying as best as you can to create that within a digital platform without that face-to-face.
So I think that's the ultimate aim of these behaviour change interventions, and you get there by looking at, okay, what are the component elements of the intervention, and how does that affect this particular group at this particular moment in time? And then 50 years later you might end up with something that's halfway there.
Okay, so just for everyone listening who may not have the app, talk us through, someone downloads the app and then what happens? So it's smoke-free, it's on iOS and Android, I've seen. So what happens? You get the app, then what happens?
So a few basic setup questions about number of smokes per day and quit date that allow us to calculate these figures so that you land on the dashboard and instantly there's kind of something there about either your quit date's in the future, then the countdown to your quit date. If your quit date is right now, then we show time smoke-free in seconds, increases in seconds. And obviously, so there's kind of something there straight away. Then we've got a few other different of those types of feedback mechanisms that I mentioned before, like the money saved, cigarettes not smoked.
Were those features around when you started the app in different places, or have you done something there that's sort of a new evolution of these metrics, or however you call them, metrics, measures?
So there's a couple of things that I think that we've done to add to the to these pre-existing kind of calculator type things. Like I said, one of them is just understand their importance and users and put those things front and center. The second thing is to understand the importance of the granularity and to show progress. And then there's other things like, so if you scroll on the time smoke-free thing, you actually see the total number of seconds, which gets to 1 million, right? Or total number of days or hours. And that, those get to big numbers quite quickly. And then there's, we added things like the right life regained figure. So one of the things that I learned from my studies was that the average smoker who quits at 30 regains about 10 years of life.
Wow.
And so you can use that figure to work out an approximation of the amount of, and the figure that we work to is for every 4 days smoke-free, you've regained another day of life.
Okay.
Now obviously we don't, these approximations.
Right. It's not a prediction.
No. Or a diagnosis, but it's meant to encourage people to give them that sense of what I'm doing is having a positive effect. And then there are other things that we've added that were completely, sort of new, like the save up feature. So you can enter things that you'd like to buy yourself with the money saved from not smoking. So you're a pregnant mother, you can put a pram in there.
Right. And is it by the very fact of someone putting something in there? Does that make it more likely that they will hit that goal because they've kind of set themselves a goal?
I mean, we haven't evaluated that in the app itself. It's an interesting question. I think we would expect people to be a little bit more motivated. You would expect some people to to want to go and get their pram or their bike or whatever. And then we count down, though. Again, we count down that. We should make a big thing about it. There's a motivation card, so people can put the most important reason for quitting with a picture. Again, using pregnant women as an example, they can put a little scan there.
Oh, right.
So there's constantly reminded of, like, this is who I'm doing it for. This is why I'm doing it. We've got a diary. So we prompt people to complete their daily diary every day. And this, the purpose of this, again, is to show progress, because if you're 3 weeks in and having a particularly severe craving, it's very easy to think that nothing much has changed. Oh, it's just as bad as it always was. I'm suffering this. I'm fed up with this. I keep having these cravings. I'm sorry, I'm just going to go back to smoking.
Right.
But if you've logged your cravings and you've logged their severity, and then you can see a little graph on them, you'll be able to spot, actually, no, this is relatively infrequent now. It feels intense. We're not very, our autobiographical memory is not very good. We're not really good at comparing ourselves to previously. So these types of mechanisms help with that.
And is that why you guys encourage people to log the cravings? So because you know that they will get less, so it provides sort of an empirical baseline for people to refer to that provides further encouragement for them that they're nearing the end of the tunnel, sort of thing.
Exactly. It's just like, this is what's happening for you, and this is clear evidence, as you say, that that things are getting better. And similarly on those lines, we've got cravings feature that allows people to categorize their cravings by how they're feeling, what they're doing, and who they are with. And so that over time you can develop just a bit more insight into, that bloke Steve, every time I'm around him, I'm always looks how many times I crave when I'm around him, because he's another smoker. And then just a bit more awareness around cravings allows the smoker to be a bit more prepared to maybe stick another patch on when they go and see Steve again, or not see Steve for a few weeks, or in another way mitigate the kind of the trigger that might otherwise cause them a problem. And then we move into these. We've got a couple of stop smoking plans within the app. So the idea really with all these tools is to provide a range of things that people who are looking to quit might benefit from the people who just think, I don't need much support. Right. Just tell me how well, I want to see how time smoke free. That's all they want. To the people who want all the bells and whistles. And these plans are moving more in that direction. So there's our daily stop smoking missions, these daily tasks that we did the experiment on, and we found that they doubled a user's chance of quitting at 3 months.
So if you set somebody a task, or if they set themselves a task, that doubled the chance of them adhering to the quitting program.
Yeah, so we set them a task, and here we're not even measuring whether people did the mission or not. We're simply looking at whether people were offered the missions.
Oh, wow.
People who were offered the missions were twice as likely to be smoke-free at the 3-month point as people who had used the other 4 features of the app. These features I mentioned just now.
What kind of missions are they?
So there are things about boosting self-confidence. As you get on in your quit, so the week-long point, we ask people to sit in a comfy chair and to breathe deeply 5 times in a row and let a little smile come across your face and reflect on the. So we're kind of reinforcing the achievement there. There are things, missions where we ask people to research medications, things that might work for them. We ask people to look at why they might want to stop smoking, to form a list of those types of things. We ask them to form plans. There's a golden rule about not stopping smoking. It's called not another puff, no matter what. We get them to repeat that as a mantra. So basically little things that are designed to be 5-10 minute tasks, not big onerous tasks, hopefully rewarding in themselves. People get a little GIF. If they mark it as complete, they get a nice little funny GIF at the end that feels rewarding, hopefully. And based on these different behavior change techniques that are used in face-to-face services. So this idea.
Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say this idea that if you were to go and sit down in front of somebody, they always say, this person looks like they're not feeling a little bit, they're feeling low in motivation. Let's boost their motivation. We obviously don't know whether someone is feeling low in motivation at that point, but we still try to, we work on the basis that they will at some point.
So one of the questions I've got about apps in this space, not necessarily smoke-free, but apps that try and sort of encourage behavior change or nudge behavior change, or in whatever direction that is, hopefully for the good, for the better of the person. But how, it's a series of quite small things that are introduced, for example, in missions, and within the missions there are different types of missions, and then there's rewards for doing the missions, and the rewards are a particular way, and it's quite detailed, it's quite sort of intricate. Like how do you work all of that out? I mean, I'm not trying to ask for the secret sauce, but is there a kind of a process that you're following, or is it just somewhat iterative, or how do you develop these things?
So with that, there was a lot of the missions came about my thinking about the sorts of plan that I would like to go through if I was stopping smoking. And I sort of went through, I stopped smoking and I started smoking again. So I put myself through the plan a few different times, N-of-1 type experiments. And then we put it out there to we did a little bit of market research. So we just gave it to a few different people and we saw what they thought of it. At this point, we're not looking to see, are these the right sorts of techniques? Are they in the right order? Are there the right number of them? We're just looking to see, okay, this, hopefully this looks like it seems on face value to be a decent enough plan. Seems to tick the boxes of the sorts of things that are done in face-to-face, and it makes sense that you'd want to, for example, get people on medications early. So we'll put people on, put on medications earlier than boosting their positivity about how well they've done. So there's a certain obviousness to the plan, and there's a certain amount of just hoping that it works. And obviously we've got it in a form that seems to work, and the work that we're doing now is to improve that iteratively. But I think in order, that this isn't just about our app and the other things that your audience could potentially use it with it. It's like, well, look at what the evidence says. Are there any kind of try and tested open source or publicly available plans that you could maybe adapt? And can you put something together that makes logical sense? Who in this field could you get to kind of review those for logical consistency or evidence, and then put it out there? So it is a process that could be followed, but it is it's quite detailed, because you're trying to come up with a plan for people that makes sense. So I think it does take a while.
Yeah, and it's the missions, it's the logging, there's just so many, there's a lot of features, and there's a thinking behind each one, and there's it's not just the feature, it's how that feature's expressed and how the people interact with it. So it just strikes me as quite intricate. And so go on.
So the other thing I was just going to say, because the other plan, which is delivered by a chatbot, have you frozen? Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Give him just a minute to. Oh, there he is. He's back. Hello, David. You cut out for a second there.
Sorry about that. So I was saying that our chatbot, which is the other plan, that basically delivers the standard treatment program, which is what you would get face to face. So there is this program created by the National Centre for Smoking Cessation and Training. So our job was to implement that digitally, which still has the same issues about how do you make it work in this medium, but at least you're not starting from scratch.
Well, let's talk about the success of the app and how you judge success of the app. So it's got over 5 million downloads, which is obviously testament in of itself. I've read some of the reviews. They're amazing. People rave about it. But from if you do this from a clinical perspective or from a sort of empirical perspective, how do you judge the success of the app, but also a particular feature? Why do you keep something on there? How do you know that feature works versus not having it or having a different feature?
So the primary outcome measure is effectiveness, measured at different time points. But we're always looking to do things that improve the effectiveness on the app, on the basis that as a long-term strategy, people will gravitate towards things that are more helpful than others. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the things that we do are like, how does this improve outcomes at a particular time point? Usually 1 month, because you'd like to go for the longer time points, but 1 month is sort of allows us to do a few different tests. But there is another very important criteria when it comes to the small businesses like ours, which is revenue. So we need to find a way of ensuring that we've got enough revenue to sustain the business, whilst not compromising effectiveness or compromising integrity, because we can't.
Like driving people towards the premium service, because you need to generate some revenue, when actually that might not necessarily be the best solution for them.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that I would just refine that a little bit, because what we try not to do is use the psychological techniques that maybe are manipulative to drive people towards their techniques. What we try to do instead is say, actually, we believe these are the things that are most likely. So we try to have more of a straight up approach to sales and try to level with people, because that trust, when you're trying to get people to change their behavior, it's critical that they trust you. If they don't trust you, they're not going to listen to you. So,
but I imagine, or I can imagine it would be a terrible experience for someone that was involved in a behavior change app or process, and then suddenly halfway through, or in order to progress, that the paywall comes down. That would probably be an unhelpful situation for that person.
Yeah, I think, and it's a difficult one, because we haven't managed to solve the problem of how to fund these types of apps. There's the digital therapeutic idea, which is very interesting. But I think that, but we also do want users to pay for this. I think there is a need because I think that there's a value in paying for the app yourself, amongst the people who can afford it. But I also think that with the smoking in particular, is something that is increasingly found in lower income communities who, the cost of an app is prohibitive, especially when it doesn't have that kind of reward that smoking would get. So we need to find a way of covering the cost for these low income people. Obviously, the health benefits are enormous. The return on investment is enormous.
So let's pick up on that, because I know that we talked about that in our show planning, which is that whether or not the NHS, before it was already looking at this, but potentially, particularly now because of COVID, will there be more investment going into digital replacements for traditional face-to-face therapies, such as smoking cessation? Which obviously a smoking cessation has a hugely valuable impact on the health service. It's I think it's like the single most important or effective thing that anyone can do to improve their own health, and also for the health service, which is why they sort of make it such a priority. Is that something that you have had some discussions about? What's your view on that? Because that might be one could argue that by providing a free app to people, you're providing a public service.
Yeah, I think because obviously what we want to do to get to this goal of having a more effective app, a more tailored app, requires a substantial amount of investment. You need a lot of people.
Ongoing investment. It's not easy.
No, exactly. So this is not something that we can fund ourselves. We need support from, we need the people that benefited from it to contribute to it. And if in some cases the people that are benefiting from it are the people in middle to higher incomes that can afford to pay for it, fantastic. Thank you very much. That's a great. It's not too expensive for them in terms of the cost of a packet of cigarettes.
Sure.
But it makes all the difference for us. But then, like I say, there's the prevalence of smoking in socioeconomic groups is much higher than in other groups, and for them, the cost, the £30 cost of an app, which is our premium product, and more, which is where we would end up probably, it's just going to put them off. It's going to be a barrier too great for them to go, I want to use that.
And also at the same time, it's unlikely or impossible if, in a post-pandemic world, for those people to, it's unrealistic to expect them to actually go to a face-to-face service either. So we just give up on certain groups giving up smoking? I mean, doesn't seem to make sense.
Exactly. I think that what we need to do is we've got to transition to a hybrid model of smoking cessation, behaviour change, and probably all kinds of behaviour change, where we're offering a range of tools for people. And the face-to-face tools, the most expensive tools, are reserved for the people who need most help.
Yeah.
The people that are really struggling, the people that can most benefit from that. Most of us can actually do either the whole thing digitally or a lot of it digitally, and then digital can just be a supplement. So getting from where we are now, which is where the evidence base for these kinds of treatments is low, and so obviously we need to build an evidence base around to show that it's effective.
Wait, just run me through that, because you said the evidence for their efficacy is low, or what do you mean the evidence base is low?
Yeah, so the overall evidence base for digital interventions is not substantial. We haven't got a lot of trials yet. The trials are usually of not great quality, and so for there's not. If you're a commissioner, if you're a health body, and you're saying, well, and actually there's a Cochrane review that just came out recently that concluded that fundamentally there's not enough evidence for digital interventions out yet, and the body that kind of produces best practice guidance is saying basically we should consider digital interventions as second line treatments. Which you go, okay, yeah, I kind of get that. If the gold standard is face-to-face services, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't provide digital services. You need to provide them in concert with face-to-face services, both to mean, as you said, that more of the resources can go and more of the people that need them, or the resources can be spread more widely, or you can just reach people who won't ever go to face-to-face.
Yeah.
And because we've got this mechanism that we can just get people with, we can provide a valuable service with the core version of the app. You can just see a time smoke free. That works, right? That's a nice little reward. And if that quit attempt isn't successful, then the user will hopefully come back to the app and go, oh, maybe I need a bit more help.
Yeah.
So we're gradually bringing people into services and getting them up the care pathway to kind of the more intensive help that they may need. But obviously, health bodies need to support that process, because who's otherwise going to pay for the treatment that those people are receiving? As you said, we can't afford to do it because it costs us money, and the user won't prioritize that for very good reasons.
Well, I can. It would have to come, I think, from the NHS or some kind of healthcare organization's budget. So, what kind of trials do you think need to be done that haven't been done?
I mean, I think we need to look at. We need to do a comparative trial of the various different digital solutions that are out there.
Okay.
That'd be well funded, and most importantly, I think, incentivized for follow-up, because the fundamental problem we find with these trials is low follow-up rates.
What does low follow-up mean in this context? What do you mean? Sorry.
What, the numbers do you mean?
No. When you say low follow-up, you mean, what does that actually mean?
So we're looking at, so the vast majority of people who are enrolled into the study don't respond to the follow-up question.
Oh, okay.
About smoking status. Like, 80%, or it can be high as 80% of people don't respond to follow-up. So it makes the findings not very reliable.
Okay.
So just, we need to incentivize follow-up. We need a proper study. We also need to look at studies within populations, and within people with COPD, for example, or pregnant women, or people with severe mental illness, or the other kinds of core issues that people struggle with. And so that over time, and we just need kind of health bodies to be a bit more adventurous with these types of trials, and to understand what kind of
pushback or what kind of obstacles have you kind of come across, in your discussions with health bodies, commissioning groups, the NHS?
I mean, inertia is the big one. Okay. It's really hard to overcome. Just the non-insignificant obstacles that are to running these trials. I mean, the NIHR is a fantastic organisation, and for example, if they were to fund, to put a call out for these kinds of trials, that would encourage the research teams that are necessary to organise them, I think. So I mean, it's it's an ongoing piece of work, I guess. We're not going to get to that evidence base for 5 or 10 years. So it's just thinking about, how do we get from here to there? And all countries like Germany, which are being really innovative with their approach towards funding, they've got an independent body that reviews the particular intervention for efficacy, ensures that the evidence, the digital intervention has got that, and then if it meets a certain threshold, will approve that for prescription and reimbursement. And I think we need to start moving to that kind of model.
Are there any digital interventions that you know of that have been approved for prescription in the UK?
I think Sleepio might have been. I mean, it's certainly on a trial, but I don't know if it's been approved for prescription. And there are, various different bodies that are looking at this. The EMIS have got an app library, and there's other, Walker who review apps for the health store. So we're moving in that direction. But I'm naturally impatient, so I'm hoping that we can just encourage this along a little bit, because it's very needed, right? It serves a real purpose.
Well, I mean, providing services digitally, I think everyone within the system understands that has to happen. But at some point you speak to someone who controls the purse strings, and they compare A with B, and if there isn't evidence there, then it's hard. I can see why it's also hard for them, even though it looks great on paper. They say, well, all I need is some evidence, but if that doesn't exist, then yes, I can see that that's a problem. So yeah, I can see why evidence generation is a huge priority in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. It's it will get there, but I think that I'm just hoping that what's happened now is that we've got a sense of the potential for digital interventions that we didn't really have prior to COVID. There wasn't that. They've been trialed a lot more. People have understood, okay, it's not as scary to implement these things. They can have a positive effect. We can do it without much negative pushback. And if that is one of the things that comes out of this whole experience, then I think that we'll be in a much better place in the future.
Yeah, and smoke-free blazing the trail.
Yeah, well, we hope so. We like to think so. That's where we want to be anyway.
Good. Well, look, David, on that note, I want to say thank you very much for coming on. I found the discussion about behavior change extremely interesting. I think what you guys are doing is great, is a public service, as I said, and I wish you all the best. Hopefully at some point, we can have you back on and find out how things are going. But thank you for coming on, and thank you to everyone for listening.
Thanks very much. Yes, it's a great pleasure. I really enjoyed the conversation.